Starting lesson 3 in our curriculum, and it is getting started with CSS. In this lesson, you will learn how to add the style tag to the HTML code, add colors to elements with CSS, and use identifiers to select elements to style. So we're going to go over a basic overview of CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's a styling language used to style elements on a web page. A style command written at the top of the code area can trickle down and apply to elements written below it. As a style sheet, CSS is used to style existing elements, not create new ones. CSS must work alongside another coding language such as HTML. In practice, HTML would be used to create a web page element such as a title, and then CSS would be used to style the title by changing the font, for example. So basically, it works together with HTML to make your web page look pretty. The style tag. Before using CSS to style your HTML elements, you would need to define a specific area for the styling code to be written. This space is created inside the HTML code itself using the style tag. The style tag is added to the head of the HTML, normally after the title tag. The style tag tells the HTML that there will be styling rules added in the space that follows. Any styling you do in CSS should be done between the opening style tag and the close style tag. So this is what we call a in-page CSS style sheet. So we have the title tag, style tag here in the head section of the document, which means it's not actually going to show up on the page, but the styling that is in this area will show up on the page. CSS works by identifying a web page element and then declaring a style to apply to it. CSS does not use angled brackets like HTML, so elements are selected simply by typing them in. A line of CSS code is called a style rule. So here's an example of a style rule for H2 headers on the page. So all you do is you type H2, and then you have a curly bracket, and you type color, colon, and then you put your color, and you always finish the style with a semicolon. And then when you finished all of the styles, you put the end close curly bracket. So this is called the selector here in the red, and then the declaration is what you're changing. The selector identifies which element on the web page will be styled. The CSS selector is the same as the text of the HTML tag used to create the element. The CSS selector is the same as the text of the HTML tag used to create the element. So if you have a paragraph tag, you can use the P as your selector, whatever is inside of the arrows. Similarly, the HTML tag for a header level 2 is H2, so the CSS selector will be H2. So you don't need the arrows when you're selecting it in the CSS section. The declaration defines which kind of style is being applied, such as color or position. It is made up of a property which defines what kind of style is being applied, followed by the value for that style. So as I was saying, you place the declaration within curly brackets, and then inside the curly brackets is where you put your properties. So if you want to have more than one, you can have as many as you want. So the property goes first, followed by a colon, and then the value of that property, and then a semicolon. Multiple declarations can be made under the same identifier as long as each is separated by a semicolon, like so. Okay, now we're going to talk about CSS color. So if you want to change the color of something on your web page, you can use CSS to do that. And you can change the color of anything. So you can change the background color of something, you could change the text color of something, you could change the link color. All of that can be done using CSS. To change the color of an element, you first identify the element you want to style using a selector. So let's say you wanted to change the color of a particular paragraph. So you would use the selector P, and this would actually change the color of all the paragraphs on the whole page. Now you can begin the declaration. Remember that a declaration is made of a property followed by a value. So the property in this case is color, and then you put a colon after that. Then after the colon is the value of the color that you want. So there's a few different ways that we name colors in the digital world. So you can, the simplest way is to write like blue, red, yellow, but that's not very specific because there's lots of different shades of blue, so you'd never know what kind of shade you will get. But you can add a specific color using a color hex value. So if you just wanted it to be any shade of yellow, you would just type yellow and then semicolon and then close your curly bracket. And that would define the paragraphs with the font color yellow. So if you use like red, it's pretty generic and there's no way to adjust the shade of red that you get. And so this is where we use RGB values or hexadecimal color systems. Those are two different ways that you can name a color. So let's talk about both. So the RGB color system creates a color by adjusting and interpreting different intensities of three colors, red, green, and blue. So that's what it stands for. RGB stands for red, green, blue. Slight adjustments in one of the values will adjust the shade of a given color, while larger changes to the values change the color itself. For an RGB color to be properly defined, all three color values must be provided, one for each of the red, green, and blue colors. So it's a mixture of red, green, and blue, whatever color you want. The red, green, and blue values go from 0 to 255, with 0 being the lowest intensity and 255 being the highest. Values are input according to the RGB acronym, with red first, green, and then blue. So, for example, if you put 255 in the red spot, and 0 in the green and 0 in the blue, then you will get pure red. Whereas if you put 255 in the green spot, the middle of your notation, it will produce pure green. And then if you put 255 in the blue spot, it will produce pure blue. And then if you put 000, that's no color in any of the spots, which produces black, and 255, 255, 255 is an equal mix of all the colors, which will produce white. So we're not talking about pigmented colors here, we are talking about colors of light that are mixed together. So if you're familiar with theater lighting, think about that. If you mix red, green, and blue together, you will get white. To define a CSS color in a color property, begin by typing RGB after the colon. So you still use the same selector, open curly bracket, color, colon, and then if you're wanting to use an RGB color, you type RGB, then you have a round bracket, then you define the three values of R, G, and B, red, green, and blue, and then you close the round bracket, semicolon, and then close the curly bracket. So you have to get all the notation correct here or it won't work. You need to be very precise. Another way that you can define a color is using a hexadecimal color system. So instead of RGB, we would use a hexadecimal value. Hexadecimal colors are defined using a range from 00 to FF. So you can go from 0 to 9, and then after 9 you use A, B, C, D, E, F. So if you want to define a hexadecimal color, 000000 is black, and FFFFFF is white. So the hexadecimal color system uses the hexadecimal number system where the base of the numbers is 16, not 10. A full number sequence in hexadecimal would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, 10, 11, 12, etc. So we don't actually use the 10, 11, 12, but you can use 1 or 0 through F. So hexa is the 6 decimal color code, so you have to have 6 values. So the first 2 values are the red values, the second 2 are the green values, and then the third 2 are the blue values. So red, if you wanted pure red, it would be FF, so that's full red, 00 on the green, 00 on the blue. And then if you wanted to have pure blue, you would put 00 in the red space, 00 in the green space, and FF, which is full capacity of blue. So this hexadecimal color system is pretty much the standard across the board for defining colors, and it's like a shortcut notation for RGB. So if you use a hexadecimal color, you have to put the hashtag symbol in front of it. That's how the browser knows that you are defining a hexadecimal color. CSS can also be used to change the background color of an entire web page. If you want to change the background color of a web page, you need to use the body selector. This selects the entire page basically. So when you use a body tag, that is encompassing the entire page. And so if you use the body selector, it's going to change the entire page's background. So in the CSS code, you would type body, and then we'll add the background color declaration, which begins with the property. So the property for background color is background-color. Whereas if you wanted to change the font, you would just, or the font color, you would just say color. Following the colon will be a value to define what color will be used. Any of the 3 color systems discussed can be used to fill a color. So you can use RGB, hex value, or you can just type a simple color. Okay, in this last section, we're going to learn how to use IDs and classes. So an ID is a name that you can give to any element to distinguish it from other elements of its type on a web page. So let's say, for example, that you want one of your paragraphs to be yellow, but not all the paragraphs on the whole page. So in order to do that, you would give that particular paragraph that you want to be yellow a unique ID name, and then you would use that ID to call that particular element in CSS and then style that particular name. So an ID needs to be assigned to an element in the HTML code before it can be called as a selector in the CSS code. So this is up to you, the writer of the code. If you want something to be set apart and different, then you need to use an ID selector. So here is how you do it. So the ID is assigned to an element in the HTML as an attribute. So for example, let's just say we had a few paragraphs on our page, right? So there's one, there's another one, and there's a third one. Okay, so first paragraph, second paragraph, and third paragraph. Okay, so let's say, oh, and we need the style tag up here so we can style it. Okay, so let's say we want all our paragraphs to be black by default, which they are, but let's just say we wanted the second paragraph to be green. So in that case, we're going to go right after the P and we're going to create an ID attribute. Okay, so we're going to type a space and we're going to type ID equals, and then we're going to type the name that we want to assign. So it can be whatever name you want. So let's just do a space and we'll type ID. We're making this up, making this name up. So let's just say green paragraph. And notice my notation here, lowercase on the first word and uppercase on the second word. Okay. It does matter how you type that. Okay, so this ID here identifies this paragraph as a special paragraph. And then in your CSS, if you want that paragraph to look different than the others, you're going to go up here to the style tag and call that particular ID. So, let's see. It should be a unique name so it doesn't get confused with other IDs. And a shorter ID name will be more efficient to use. Okay, now you go to the style area and you add your ID selector. But when you use an ID, you have to start it with the hashtag symbol. So our ID is right here, green paragraph. So up here in the style sheet, we're going to do hashtag green paragraph, and it knows that it's there because Adam's trying to help us here. So then we would do our curly brackets and we would type color green, or you can use RGB values 0, G is in the middle, so 255 0, and then after your parentheses close, you do the semicolon. Okay, so that's going to make only the second paragraph green. Let's see if it worked here. Okay, so our first paragraph, third paragraph are black. The second one is green. This value of green is the full value of green. You may not want to use that green, but that's just the one that I wanted to show you as an example. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit more sense about IDs can have specific attributes, okay, on a specific element. A class is different, okay, so class and IDs are similar, but they're a little bit different. So IDs can only be applied to one element. Classes can be applied to multiple elements. So a class name is an identifier name given to a set of elements that will be styled together. While IDs are best used to identify a single element, classes are better to be used to identify multiple elements. Class names, like ID names, are assigned to elements in the HTML code through an attribute. So you do it the same way, but it's called a class instead of an ID. The class attribute is added to the tag with the text class equals whatever you want to name it. Okay, so You can still add a class to any element. So P class name, or whatever you want to name it, it would look like that. The same attribute, class name, can be added to multiple elements to group them under the same class. All elements within the given class name can then be called in the CSS to be styled. A class is identified in CSS using a period symbol before the class name. Alright, so let's try this out. Let's say for example, let me add a few more paragraphs here. So let's do this. Okay, so we have lots of paragraphs. Let's just say we want some of our paragraphs to have a different font than others. But we don't want to change the font of just one like we did with the green. So we can use a class and create a class that we can apply to only the paragraphs that we want with that specific font. Okay. So let's create our class first. So we're going to go up here to the style sheet, and we're going to call this class font. And we are making this up. Okay, so we've got curly brackets. So our font family, we're going to do, how about Verdana? Let's see, why isn't that coming? Okay, let's just do one of these ones. So let's do sans serif, because by default we've got serif fonts. So let's do font family sans serif, and let's try, I think we have to use that. Okay, yeah. And so this particular class can then be applied to the paragraphs that we want to be sans serif. So right now, all of our paragraphs look like they're Times New Roman, okay? And the second one has an ID that makes it green. Okay, so let's go back to our paragraphs. Let's say we want the first one to be sans serif instead of Times New Roman. So we're going to do P space class equals font, because that's the class that we named. We don't have to use the period down here, only in the style sheet. Let's say we want the first paragraph to be that, we want the third paragraph to be that, and we want the fifth paragraph to be that. Okay, and then if we do that, if we apply that to all of the ones we want it on, then you can see when you're previewing it, this is sans serif, this is Times New Roman, sans serif, Times New Roman, sans serif, Times New Roman. Okay, so classes are used to apply to multiple things on the page. IDs are used only once on each page. Okay, so we learned about the basics of using CSS to style our web pages, change colors of elements, and using class and ID identifiers. So let me know if you have any questions, and go ahead and do the activities associated with lesson 3.